Hey, friends and fellow singers. If you need a jumpstart to get back to practicing, then today I want you to hop over to my singing hub where there are plenty of freebies, including an MP3 on flexibility vocal exercises. Now, I've got it for you and it's in the show notes, so please just take the time right now, go to the show notes, click on the link, and go grab your free stuff. It's right there for you. On today's episode, I'm going to answer some questions that often get asked about the singing voice. Now, I've heard all of these at least once and some many times over, but join me for this quickie Q&A.
You're listening to the Engaging Voice Podcast with Tara B. Each episode, Tara will bring you insightful instruction on the voice with interviews, technique, and training so you can have a tension-free, healthy, beautiful singing voice that flourishes and lasts a lifetime.
Hey friends, thanks for joining me on this episode today. I just so appreciate you being willing to come back time after time and listening to these different episodes. And I think today might be kind of a fun one because honestly, these are just questions that tend to get asked of voice teachers. And so I just kind of want to tackle some of them myself because as I said, I've heard some of these before. And maybe they're questions that you've had. And so I hope it's helpful for you. The first question I oftentimes get is, can anyone learn to sing? And my answer, which you probably already know this, is absolutely yes. You know, everyone who possesses vocal cords, they have that possibility of singing. It often takes willingness to simply try and see what comes out, you know, whether you're singing along to music on the radio or at a concert. And I know that not everybody always sings in tune at first, but it's definitely possible to learn. And if you remember, or for those of you who are newer to me, I actually have a podcast all about monotone singing. And monotone singing is where people have a hard time hearing pitches, but even then, it's possible to learn. So yes, it just takes, like I said, a willing heart to want to try and use this voice that I believe God has given to everyone. Another question that I have gotten, number 2, is how do I sing louder? And I think a lot of people that ask the question maybe have had experience where they feel like they haven't been heard, or maybe they have an experience where they feel like they've been around other singers and they're just more shy in their singing. But the thing that I want to focus on is that great singing is not so much about being able to have this loudness in your voice, even projecting your voice. Yeah, it's part of it. But I really think that sometimes when people get into this mode of singing loudly, like that's their goal, what happens oftentimes is they just get into screaming or pushing more with their voice. And I really find that a better way to think about even getting volume out of your own vocal cords is to talk about resonance. Resonance in your voice that is naturally there. And resonance, I've talked about this in another episode too, but basically it's when there's fullness in your voice or like this reverberating timbre. And it only comes out, it's only going to let your sound this full sound when there's no tension in your throat, vocal cords, mouth, or any other places that we utilize for singing. What happens is, to have good resonance, is we use the breath for singing, and it's happening. It goes through those vocal folds, vibrates them, and it comes out through our resonating chambers, which has to do with our throat, sinus, and mouth. But we're allowing that sound to be as full inside as possible. I think a lot of people just think, open your mouth and more loudness will come out, and that is not necessarily true. But that is something that I would rather have people focus on, is resonance versus loudness. The third question that has been asked a lot is, should I use my mouth or nose for breathing? Well, basically, we actually do kind of use both. Think about it, because like when you have a cold or something and you have a plugged nose, and so you find it really hard to get a breath. So there is a little bit of us utilizing both our mouth and nose. But the thing is, Nose breathing in general, while it can be really helpful for like beginning students, especially getting that sense of a full breath. I shouldn't say just beginning students because that can be for any of us at any time. But a nose breath really takes too long. And we really want to focus on just allowing our mouth as we open it to take breath in so that our rib cage expands fully. And that can happen, especially if we're willing to let out enough air, like on a shh, that kind of thing when we're singing. When we let it out, there's just this natural inhalation then that allows the breath to come in through our mouth. The fourth question that is a frequently asked question is, why do I run out of breath when I sing? Well, you guys, it could be a number of things. It might be that you really never allowed enough air to fill up your lungs in the first place. Like you have only gotten a really shallow breath from the top of your lungs, like that kind of thing where it's really quick and it just comes from basically the top part of your lungs. Or it might be that you quickly let out your breath on the first couple of notes, that you're maybe just not pacing your breath at a rate that allows you to use it gradually. You might attack a phrase too boldly, like kind of let all your air like, hey, or hey, and it's way too much air that's been let out quickly. It could be that your chest or your neck literally start to curve or droop. And so it's not really allowing the breath to stay there because it's actually cutting off with your bad posture at that point. Or maybe you're pushing it out the whole time. Instead of just letting that breath support you, that I've noticed is sometimes when people try to belt, they push the air so hard and there's really nothing left. They can only sing short phrases because they've pushed air so hard just for that belting. So those can be reasons why we do run out of breath. The fifth question I have heard quite a few times from younger singers, and I have to admit, as a teenager, I'm sure I thought the same thing. But here's the question. Will I sound like an opera singer if I take voice lessons? And I know it's funny, I was so scared of sounding like an opera singer too that I thought, I don't want any lessons. I don't want to sound like that. And it's ironic, you guys, because as you know me, those of you who have listened, I love opera now. And I just really have a heart for that kind of singing. Though I love opera now, I know a lot of people don't. And I think that they think that opera singers are singing in this really weird way. Like it's exaggerated. But really, opera singers, they're just simply singing in parts of their voices that are producing some of the greatest resonance. And they're using their voice to fill over a stage and an orchestra. So think about the projection, everything. So that's why they have to. And they're singing up here. They're not singing usually in this chestier voice. So no, most of us are probably not going to have that big of a voice so that we would even sound that way necessarily. And when you're, 14, 15, your vocal folds haven't even really developed enough in the rest of your body to produce that huge of a sound. It's not often that young singers will have that capability of it. And really the only way that you would probably sound like an opera singer is if you're either trying to emulate it, or maybe you are working on some arias, something that would be related to opera or oratorios. But even then, if you're using your voice with no tension and just singing naturally, it may or may not sound that way. The beauty of many opera singers is simply that they have worked on bringing out the most resonance and richness in their voices. And I know that when I teach singers, I want to help them find the most healthy ways of singing, which means not manipulating the vocal sound. And believe it or not, you guys, pop singers today that are popular on the radio, many of them manipulate their voices. And so our culture has gotten totally used to that. And so that's why I think it's so far removed from what even a natural sound of the voice can sound like. I think it's important to think about what the sound of a voice can sound like all through the range. And to be honest, you guys, as you get higher in your voice, it's going to change. It's going to sound different. When I sing here and when I sing here, of course it's going to sound different. Now I have a 51-year-old voice too, so obviously there's some maturity that will make my voice sound a certain way. But just make sure that if you are thinking about what maybe a natural sound of the voice sounds like, go back 60 to 70 years, I kid you not, and listen to the voices that you heard on the radio then, especially if they were somewhat trained and just unmanipulated. It is different. Think people like Bing Crosby, Perry Como. I mean, those guys, when they're singing, there's a natural resonance that's in their voice, but it's not manipulated. Now, does it sound operatic? Not necessarily, but it just sounds natural. Number 6, how do I find a voice teacher that is right for me? Well, that can be a little bit tricky, and it can be a little bit more of a personal question, because the biggest thing with a voice teacher, I don't care who it is, whenever you study with someone, it's vulnerable to share your voice. I know that. And so you really want to find a teacher that you feel this kind of natural chemistry and comfortableness. I would say you want to find a combo of someone who knows about the structure of the voice, the vocal apparatus, and not just a performance coach, because I do know voice teachers that it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but they never get to the things that are actually about the physical parts of the voice, and you need to know that. But also to find someone who's not just knowledgeable, but someone who's really empathetic to each student and structures a lesson really to fit you. And you know what? It may take a few lessons to see if someone is a good fit for you. I've had 4 different vocal teachers in my lifetime. I think I've been very blessed to find teachers who did fit quite well with who I am and what they taught. But even so, I just think that it's important to take the time and see what the chemistry feels like with a teacher. I know I've heard stories of people where they had teachers and they felt like they were afraid in lessons, or like they couldn't be themselves. And the thing is, when we're training, we're going to be making mistakes. We're going to be doing things that we're trying to learn. I still do with my teacher, but I'll just say, like with her, I love that she challenges me, but she doesn't criticize me. She critiques, and critiquing is different than criticism. It's not a put down. It's just showing you a way to say, here's something I noticed and let me help you with it. And I think that can be a great teacher when you find that, the combo of their knowledge and the combo of their willingness to help you. Number 7, how often should I take voice lessons? Well, I think when you first start training, it really is wiser to take every week. Partly just to be accountable, to check in, and make sure that you're really understanding what your teacher is saying. It will help you to get in a routine of practice. And I think it also just lets your voice get used to the feeling of using it all the time. That's really important. It's just like exercising. Think about it. When you start an exercise routine, it's going to be the same thing, where you want to get in a habit of it. But it's really better if you have someone guiding you along more often than not. Now, as the years go on, you may just check in periodically with a teacher, maybe bi-monthly or monthly, twice a month. But at that point, really, you're going to know what's better for you. And you have to also remember, are you the type of person who is really disciplined on your own? Or do you need to check in more because you need that extra ongoing support and accountability? So, and also if you just want more of a challenge because you want to keep learning more, you might want to take more. Number 8, how long will it take to hear results in my voice? Well, this is kind of an answer that I can't fully answer because every person is so different. It depends on things with your voice, your age, your ability to learn, how much time you put into your lessons. And, you know, some things you might hear right away. For instance, if you've never had voice lessons and you start training with a teacher, some of the things early on you might hear changing faster than as you kind of go later into lessons. They might be more subtle changes and you may not hear as many things or feel as many things, but you're still moving ahead. So don't always measure by just, if it's some major change. Oftentimes I have found as I teach and as I have taken lessons that it is small incremental changes that happen. They're not these huge things, but over time they build on one another. And here's the deal. 3 years ago, when I started back into lessons, I was honestly in my mind thinking that I was just going to take for like 3 months. That's what I thought. And then as I started taking with my teacher and learning more and practicing more, I realized I didn't want to stop. And so here I am 3 years later, still taking lessons. Just remember, it's a marathon. It is not a sprint. And if you think about, again, the physical body, when you develop stamina and muscles, like in exercising, it takes time. You don't just exercise for, 2 months and all of a sudden you're totally ripped, or, your body feels completely fit, or you have amazing stamina. No, it's over a period of time. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't see results right away, because it may take some effort before things change. And then something might just click, and that clicking will lead to something else. And that's awesome. Number 9, why does my voice seem great some days and then not so good the next? That's a question people tend to ask. Well, your voice, it's made of tissue, muscle, and like anything else in your body, it's affected by a lot of things. It's affected by the amount of sleep you got. It's affected if there's stress in your life, what things you might be eating, if you're working out, if you live in a drier climate or a more humid climate. I mean, your body, just think about it. It's so connected. And so everything is going to affect parts of it. Just like your ligaments and tendons might feel more flexible one day and then not the next. So your voice is subject to change. It really is. And don't be discouraged by that either, because on the days it's not so great, just take note of it and say, you know what, this was hard today. And that's it. And then just know that another day is around the corner. I guarantee you that it's not like you're usually going to have like 10 days in a row of bad practice. What usually happens is somewhere in there, you have a great day. And just build on that. That's what we have to do. The last question that is from my 10 questions I wanted to answer today is, I get this one probably the most. A person will ask me, hey, Tara, will you listen to me and tell me what you think about my voice? And I have to laugh at that one, you guys, because because it usually doesn't come from someone I know well. It usually comes from someone who's a total stranger, or someone maybe new on social media. And right away they find out I'm a voice teacher, and so they want to ask about me listening to them. And if that's you, if that's someone, or maybe you've heard that before, or you've wanted to ask that, I mean, it's an okay question. I'm not saying the question is bad in itself. But just remember that vocal teachers can help with that. But it's wiser, instead of just trying to throw that out there, because think of the time and effort that takes from the person you're asking it to, it would be better to find a teacher and just say, can I have a lesson with you? And would you be able to assess just what's going on with my voice, or if I can even sing? And most vocal teachers that I know, at least, they're more than happy to give you a lesson. Now, yes, you will pay for it, but my point is to just have an introductory lesson. Sure, they're willing to help. It's just better to have an assessment by a professional and actually doing it, when they are teaching. For example, let's say that you had a skin problem and you knew a dermatologist who went to your church, and you went up to him or her and you said, hey, can you just look at this spot on my arm and tell me what's going on? It's like that wouldn't really be appropriate for the spot. It's not an inappropriate question if you were at the office where they are, the clinic where they're at, and you're asking them there. Not at all. But I think sometimes we have to realize that there's always great places where we can get help from people. And it's no different with a voice. The cool part is, if you go to a vocal teacher and you get a lesson, you won't only find out about your voice, but you might gain some valuable tools in the process for singing. And who knows? You might want more lessons after that, which is pretty cool. So basically, you guys, I really hope that this has been helpful to you in just some of the answers to these questions, because I know that people do have them. And while I was just talking about, it's maybe not best to ask someone to actually give you a vocal assessment unless you're going to go get a lesson with them, I do welcome questions about the voice in general. So if you have something that I haven't covered in a podcast episode, please reach out and just ask me, because it may trigger another episode that I can do, because if you have the question, someone else probably has it too. That's the thing. A lot of times people are afraid to ask questions. And then the thing is, they need to because someone else might be posing the same question and is also afraid to ask. So don't be afraid to do that. Just write and ask me and reach out. And you know what? If you're the one whose question I pull out and do an episode on, I'll just mention you on the podcast. Wouldn't that be fun? Well, friends, if you would be so kind as to subscribe to this podcast, that would just delight my heart. I know some of you have already, but if you haven't, take the time. Wherever you listen, just hit subscribe. And the other thing that you can do that's super helpful to me, if you feel like it, if you felt like even today's episode was helpful to you and you want to share it on social media, I would be so honored, because that allows other people to even be aware of this podcast. And you can share it directly from any of these places of listening: Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and Player FM. Plus, you can also just go straight to my website, theengagingvoice.com, and you can share it from there. So that would be super helpful for me if you did that. And you know what? For your listening experience, I know I've said it before, but you can actually ask Alexa or Siri to play this podcast. You just, say their name and then say, play the podcast, The Engaging Voice, and they will pull it up for you. Now, how fun is that? Well, friends, you know from listening before that I so appreciate you as a listener.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Engaging Voice. Tara is committed to giving you tools each week to keep your voice thriving. Join her next time for another valuable and informative chapter.